Caden Blackwell had always been the type of person who preferred the shadows. As a child, he was taught to keep a low profile, to stay out of the spotlight. His family, wealthy and influential, had long upheld a reputation for being powerful but discreet. The Blackwell name was synonymous with success, but the people who carried it were always careful to avoid the public eye. That was how Caden had grown up, surrounded by luxury but isolated from the world outside. He was a man of few words, and most people who knew him would describe him as cold, distant, and elusive. Caden didn't mind the labels, in fact, he welcomed them. He had never been one for socializing or the superficial conversations that filled the social circles his parents had once tried to thrust him into. He had always found more comfort in his work, in building his business empire, than in the high society events that were expected of someone of his status. Blackwell Enterprises, his family's company, was one of the most successful tech firms in the world, and at the age of 30, Caden had taken it to new heights. He had the world at his feet, and yet, he remained just as solitary as he had always been. While his peers went to galas, had relationships, and partied until dawn, Caden spent his nights in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by piles of paperwork, blueprints, and the endless stream of emails that came with running a global business. His social life was non-existent, and his family had long since given up trying to change that. His mother, Grace Blackwell, had accepted that her only son would never marry for love, let alone marry at all. She had tried to arrange a few introductions, but Caden always found a way to politely refuse. His lack of interest in relationships, particularly romantic ones, wasn't something he ever discussed with anyone. It wasn't that he didn't find women attractive, he had simply never found anyone who intrigued him enough to invest his time or emotions. It was easier to keep people at a distance, to avoid the complications that relationships often brought. That was until he met her. Lily Davis wasn't someone he had planned on meeting, nor was she the type of woman he usually found himself interested in. She wasn't from a wealthy family, didn't know the right people, and had no interest in climbing the social ladder. In fact, Lily was a young doctor working in a busy hospital, spending most of her time on her feet, dealing with the chaotic and unpredictable nature of emergency care. She had built her own path, independent and unwavering in her dedication to helping others. Caden first saw her when his company hosted a charity event to raise funds for a local hospital. His parents had insisted he attend, as they often did with charity events, and Caden had reluctantly agreed, knowing it would be the perfect opportunity to make some key connections for the business. The evening was everything Caden had expected: shallow conversations, pretentious smiles, and people eager to talk about their donations rather than the cause itself. Caden had grown tired of it all. He had already given his monetary support to the cause, but he had no intention of getting involved any further. It was then that Lily walked in. She wasn't dressed in the glitzy gown everyone else was wearing. Instead, she wore a simple, elegant dress that contrasted sharply with the extravagance of the others around her. Caden couldn't help but notice her. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. There was no artificial aura around her, no need to make a statement. She simply existed in the room, her eyes scanning the crowd as though she was looking for something, or perhaps, someone. When she smiled at someone who recognized her, it was warm and genuine, like the kindness she exuded was completely natural. And then, their eyes met. For a brief moment, Caden felt like the room had fallen away. The noise, the laughter, the hollow conversations, all of it vanished. It was just him and her, staring across the room. It wasn't an instant attraction, at least not in the way that people often described it. It was something quieter, subtler, like a tug in his chest he couldn't explain. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: curiosity. She was speaking to a group of doctors and nurses who had gathered near the bar, but when she noticed Caden's gaze, she gave a polite smile and turned back to the group. Caden hadn't realized until then how uncomfortable he felt in the sea of people around him. The fact that he was a billionaire and could buy anything in this world didn't seem to matter at that moment. All he could think about was Lily, a woman who had nothing to prove and seemed completely uninterested in the lavish world he inhabited. The night went on, but Caden found himself unable to focus on anything but her. When the event came to a close, he made his way to the exit, but just before he reached the door, he saw her again, standing alone near the coat check. Without thinking, he walked toward her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the quiet confidence she exuded, or maybe it was the fact that he had never met anyone like her. He approached her slowly, unsure of what he would say when he reached her. But when he did, he was surprised to find that it was as though the awkwardness he usually felt in social situations didn't exist here. There was something about her that made everything feel easy. "Dr. Davis, I assume?" Caden said, his voice smooth but not overly formal. She looked up at him, her expression softening when she recognized him. "Yes, I am," she replied, her tone light, and for the first time that night, Caden heard a note of humor in her voice. "And you are, the elusive Mr. Blackwell?" He couldn't help but chuckle. "Guilty as charged." For the first time in a long time, Caden felt like they were on the same level, not because of their social statuses but because they were two people simply meeting each other in an authentic way. "I've heard a lot about you," Lily said, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "But I didn't expect to meet you at a charity event. I assumed you'd be at the bar, making deals." He raised an eyebrow. "How did you know I wasn't already at the bar making deals?" She shrugged casually. "You seem like the kind of man who likes to make his presence known. But here you are, sneaking around the coat check." Her teasing made him smile. He wasn't used to this, being seen for who he was, not who people thought he was. "I suppose I've been known to sneak around a bit," he said with a smirk. "But tonight, I'm just here to enjoy the view." She looked at him, her gaze no longer guarded, and a small smile appeared on her lips. "Well, I suppose the view is worth staying for." There was an ease to the way they conversed, a fluidity that surprised him. And before he knew it, the evening had drawn to a close, and they found themselves standing outside the venue, the cool night air brushing against their faces. "Would you like to get a drink sometime?" Caden asked before he could second-guess himself. He wasn't sure why the question came out so suddenly, but it felt like the right thing to say. Lily considered him for a moment, and then nodded. "I'd like that." With that simple exchange, Caden found himself with something he had never expected, a connection. It was the beginning of something, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he might be ready for it. It wasn't just a fleeting attraction, it was the spark of something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. He had spent 30 years in the shadows, hiding behind the walls he had built, but somehow, meeting Lily felt like stepping into the light. The days following that night at the charity event were a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty for Caden. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so drawn to someone. In fact, he had spent much of his adult life avoiding people, staying in his fortress of solitude, focused on his empire. But Lily had changed that. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably stunning. It was her presence, the way she spoke to him without fear, without needing anything from him. She had seen him not as the cold billionaire the world often made him out to be, but as just another person, someone worthy of a simple conversation. He found himself thinking about her often, replaying their brief exchanges in his mind, her laugh, her smile, the warmth in her eyes when she had spoken to him. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Caden had always been content with his solitary life, with his books, his work, and the quiet spaces he inhabited. But now, his thoughts kept returning to Lily, and the prospect of seeing her again seemed like a breath of fresh air, something he hadn't realized he was craving. A week passed before he finally worked up the courage to call her. He had found her number, buried deep in his phone, but it wasn't like him to simply reach out. He wasn't the kind of man who made spontaneous decisions, everything in his life was carefully controlled. But Lily, she was different. After some internal back and forth, he dialed her number, the line ringing for a moment before she picked up. "Hello." Her voice was warm, but slightly surprised. "It's Caden Blackwell," he said, trying to sound as casual as possible. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. There was a brief pause on the other end. Caden could feel his pulse quicken, unsure of how she would respond. He wasn't used to being unsure of things, and it made him feel exposed in a way he hadn't felt in years. No, not at all, Lily replied. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. What's up? Her tone was light, and Caden felt his nerves begin to ease. She wasn't dismissive, and she didn't sound like she was just being polite. It felt real. I was thinking, Caden started, his voice a little lower than usual, maybe we could get together for a drink sometime. I don't know if you'd be interested, but I'd like to continue our conversation from the other night. There it was. The invitation had left his lips before he could stop it. He waited for her response, feeling both vulnerable and hopeful. There was a long pause, and for a second, he feared she might decline. But then, her voice broke the silence, sounding genuine and warm. I'd like that, she said simply. When were you thinking? Caden smiled to himself, relieved. How about this weekend? Saturday night. I know a quiet place where we can talk. Saturday sounds great, Lily agreed. I look forward to it. He ended the call with a simple goodbye and placed his phone down, his mind racing. There was no reason to overthink it, he told himself. It was just a drink. But in the pit of his stomach, he knew it was more than that. He had already let himself become invested, and that was something he hadn't done in a long time. Saturday night came, and Caden found himself pacing in his penthouse, unsure of what to wear, of how to act, of what to say. It was all so foreign to him. He had been to countless parties, attended endless meetings, and spoken with so many people over the years, but this felt different. This wasn't a business deal. It wasn't a strategy. This was just him, Caden Blackwell, meeting a woman who had no reason to be impressed by him. He decided on a simple black shirt, jeans, and a jacket. He didn't want to come off as trying too hard, but he still wanted to look put together. His reflection in the mirror seemed foreign to him, too. He didn't recognize the man he saw. The man in the mirror wasn't the same man who had spent years shutting himself off from everyone, burying himself in his work, avoiding any real connection. When he arrived at the restaurant, a quiet bistro tucked away in a corner of the city, Caden was already feeling a little nervous. He hadn't been on a date in years. The dimly lit restaurant had a cozy, intimate feel to it, the kind of place where conversations flowed easily and the world outside seemed to fade away. He took a seat at the bar and ordered a glass of red wine, waiting for Lily to arrive. The minutes felt like hours as he fidgeted with his napkin, his mind replaying every moment of the conversation they had had the other night. And then, she walked in. Lily entered the bistro, looking effortless in a simple but elegant dress. Her hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and her eyes sparkled as she scanned the room. Caden's heart skipped a beat as their gazes met. The world around him seemed to blur. She walked toward him, her steps confident, yet graceful. Hi, she said with a smile that could light up the room. I'm sorry I'm a little late. The traffic was a nightmare. Caden stood up as she reached him, a small but genuine smile forming on his lips. No problem at all, he said, his voice a little more confident than he felt. I'm just glad you could make it. They sat down at a small table by the window, the city lights twinkling outside. Caden found himself studying her, taking in the way she carried herself, the way her eyes shone with warmth, the way she spoke with such ease. She wasn't nervous, as he was. She didn't seem intimidated by his wealth or his status. She was simply Lily. And that, in itself, was a rarity in Caden's world. The conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about their lives, their interests, and what had led them to this point. Lily spoke passionately about her work, about the patients she cared for, and the challenges she faced in the hospital. Her dedication to her profession was evident, and Caden admired her for it. He found himself captivated by her ability to live in the moment, to focus on what truly mattered, rather than the endless pursuit of success that had consumed his life for so long. "You know," Lily said as she sipped her wine, "I never thought I'd find myself here, sitting across from someone like you." Caden raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" Lily smiled, her gaze softening. "Someone so disconnected from the world. But it's nice, Caden. It's refreshing to meet someone who doesn't want anything from me. No agendas, no expectations." Caden's heart fluttered in his chest. He hadn't expected her to say that. He had expected her to be guarded, to keep him at arm's length, but instead, she had opened up to him in a way that felt real. "I feel the same way," he admitted, leaning back in his chair. "I've spent so much time building my company, trying to be the perfect businessman, that I forgot what it feels like to just talk to someone without worrying about what they want from me. But with you, Lily, it's different." For the rest of the evening, the world outside the bistro didn't matter. It was just the two of them, laughing, talking, and enjoying each other's company. Caden felt more alive than he had in years, and it wasn't because of the expensive restaurant or the fine wine. It was because of her, because of the way she made him feel seen, understood, and valued for who he truly was, not for the title he held or the wealth he possessed. As they parted ways that night, Caden walked Lily to her car. The night air was cool, and the city streets were quiet. He didn't want the evening to end. He didn't want to let go of the connection they had shared. "I had a great time tonight," Lily said, her smile warm and sincere. "So did I," Caden replied, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I'd like to see you again, if you're interested." Lily looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "I'd like that, too." And with that simple exchange, Caden knew that this was only the beginning. Something had shifted in him, something he hadn't expected. He wasn't just drawn to her, he was beginning to feel something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. And for the first time, Caden was ready to explore it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Caden. What had started as an unexpected connection with Lily had turned into something far more significant than he had anticipated. Each time they met, the bond between them deepened, and though Caden tried to convince himself that it was just another passing attraction, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward her. It was different this time. It wasn't just the physical chemistry or the easy conversation. It was the way she made him feel grounded, the way she made him question the life he had built for himself. He found himself thinking about her more often than he should have. When he woke up in the mornings, her smile was the first thing on his mind. When he worked late into the night, her laughter was the echo that kept him from losing himself in the mountain of work that always seemed to surround him. His life, once defined by the cold calculations of business deals and high-stakes meetings, was now filled with moments of joy, the kind of joy that Lily effortlessly brought into his world. Lily, for her part, was equally affected by their growing connection. She had always been focused on her career, and her life had been full of long hours in the hospital, emergency surgeries, and the constant pressure to prove herself in a male-dominated field. But when she was with Caden, everything felt different. He didn't ask for anything from her except her time and attention, and there was something deeply refreshing about that. He didn't try to change her or push her into a mold. With him, she felt like she could just be herself. Their dates were simple but meaningful. They spent time at local coffee shops, walked through art galleries, and had quiet dinners where the conversation flowed easily between them. They explored new corners of the city, discovering places neither of them had ever been to before. Caden was beginning to realize that he enjoyed the mundane moments with her just as much as the grand gestures. It wasn't the expensive restaurants or the lavish gifts he had gotten used to offering to others. It was the moments of true connection, those quiet hours when they could simply be together, sharing their thoughts, their fears, and their dreams. But as much as Caden was opening up, there was still a part of him that hesitated to fully let go. He wasn't used to vulnerability. It terrified him, to be honest. In the past, he had built walls around himself, walls that kept everyone out, especially the people who could get close enough to hurt him. And while Lily was different, he couldn't quite shake the fear that one day, she would see him for who he truly was and walk away. One evening, after they had spent a pleasant afternoon strolling through a local park, they sat down on a bench, watching the sun set over the skyline. Caden felt a sense of peace settle over him as he looked at her, her features softened by the fading light. "I've been thinking," Lily began, her voice a little hesitant. "I know we've only been seeing each other for a short time, but I feel like there's something here. Something real." Caden's chest tightened at her words, his heart hammering in his ribcage. He had always prided himself on being in control of his emotions, but hearing her say that stirred something inside him, something that both thrilled and terrified him. He had known, deep down, that he was beginning to care for her more than he had anticipated, but hearing her acknowledge it out loud made everything feel more tangible. "I feel the same way," he said softly, his voice low as he turned to face her. "But I don't want to rush anything, Lily. We've both been through a lot, and I don't know if I'm ready for." Lily placed her hand on his, her touch gentle but firm. "I'm not rushing you, Caden. I just wanted to say what's been on my mind. We're both adults, and I don't want to pretend that what we have isn't important to me. I just want to be honest with you." Caden swallowed, his heart racing in his chest. He hadn't expected her to be so direct, but he admired her for it. She was always honest, always genuine, and it made him feel like he could be the same with her. "I haven't been the easiest person to get close to," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life building walls around myself, pushing people away. But with you, it's different. You make me want to tear those walls down." Lily's eyes softened, and for the first time in their time together, she leaned in and kissed him, soft, slow, and filled with a quiet intensity that left Caden breathless. It wasn't just a kiss of attraction, it was a kiss that spoke volumes about the trust they were building, about the connection that was growing between them. When they pulled away, Caden rested his forehead against hers, his breath still ragged. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know I don't want to let you go." Lily smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "You don't have to. I'm here, Caden. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a long time, Caden felt something stir within him, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he could let go of his fears and allow himself to embrace what was unfolding between them. The following weeks brought a new sense of ease to their relationship. They continued to see each other regularly, spending their days and nights together, slowly building a foundation of trust and understanding. Caden found himself becoming more and more comfortable with Lily, opening up in ways he never had before. He talked about his childhood, the loneliness he had felt growing up in a world that demanded perfection. He spoke about the pressure of living up to the Blackwell name, of constantly being scrutinized, and how it had shaped him into the person he had become. Lily, in turn, shared her own struggles, about her demanding job, the long hours, and the sacrifices she had made to get to where she was. She told him about her failed relationships, how she had tried to make things work with people who never understood her dedication to her career, her passion for helping others. But she didn't feel the need to apologize for it, not with Caden. He listened, he understood, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to choose between her career and her heart. One evening, as they sat together in the living room of Caden's penthouse, the conversation turned toward their future. Lily had always been someone who took things one day at a time, but as their connection grew deeper, she found herself imagining what a future with Caden could look like. "I never expected to be here," she said, her voice soft as she gazed out the window at the city skyline. "I never imagined that I would meet someone like you, someone who makes me feel seen. But now that I have, I don't want to lose it." Caden turned toward her, his heart heavy with emotion. "I feel the same way," he said. "You're not like anyone I've ever met. You're real. You make me want to be a better person, Lily." Her eyes searched his face, and in that moment, Caden realized how far he had come. He had started this journey believing that he was incapable of love, too broken to truly connect with someone. But Lily had shown him that wasn't true. She had broken through the walls he had built around himself, and in doing so, she had changed everything. We don't have to have all the answers right now, Caden continued. But I'm willing to figure this out. With you. Lily smiled, her eyes shimmering with something that could only be described as hope. Then let's figure it out together. And with that simple promise, Caden realized that, for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the future. He didn't have all the answers, but he was ready to take the next step. With Lily by his side, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks following their heart-to-heart conversation were a blur of quiet moments and deepening connection. Caden and Lily spent their days in the cocoon of each other's presence, exploring new parts of the city, sharing stories from their pasts, and discovering the simple joy of spending time with someone who truly understood them. But as the days went on, Caden began to feel the pressure of his own internal struggles. He had spent so much of his life building his empire, keeping a wall between himself and the rest of the world, that even though he was drawn to Lily, he wasn't entirely sure how to navigate the complexities of a relationship. He had never been in a situation where he had to share his emotions freely, to lay himself bare and trust someone else with his heart. Lily, for her part, was beginning to fall for Caden in a way she hadn't expected. The more she got to know him, the more she admired his intelligence, his ambition, and the layers beneath the surface that he had carefully hidden from the world. But what struck her most was his vulnerability, the way he slowly began to open up to her about his fears and his past. Caden wasn't the type of man who wore his emotions on his sleeve, but when he did let his guard down, Lily saw a side of him that few others ever had. But as much as they were growing closer, there was still an unspoken tension between them. Caden had been clear from the start that he didn't want to rush anything, but as their feelings for each other deepened, Lily couldn't help but wonder where they were headed. She had been burned before by relationships that had fizzled out or ended abruptly. She didn't want to put herself in a position where she was vulnerable, only to find out that Caden wasn't as invested as she was. It was a Friday evening when everything changed. Caden had planned a quiet dinner at his penthouse, just the two of them. He wanted to do something special, but he could sense that Lily was beginning to pull back, her usual warmth replaced by a hint of distance. He wasn't sure what was going on, but he could tell that something was troubling her. He had always been perceptive about people's moods, but Lily was different. She didn't wear her emotions on her sleeve the way he did, and that made it harder to understand what she was feeling. When she arrived, he greeted her with a smile, but even as he kissed her on the cheek, he could sense the hesitation in her movements. They sat down to eat, and for the first time in weeks, the conversation felt forced. The easy flow of words between them had vanished, replaced by an awkward silence that neither of them knew how to bridge. After a few moments, Caden couldn't take it anymore. He set his fork down and looked at her directly. "Lily, what's going on? You've been distant all evening. Is everything okay?" Lily froze, her eyes meeting his. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then closed it again, unsure of what to say. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city outside the window. She sighed, placing her hands on the table, her fingers tapping nervously. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice soft. "I think I'm just scared. Scared of what this is, scared of how fast everything is moving. We've only been seeing each other for a few weeks, and yet, I feel like we're already so deep in. And I'm not sure if I'm ready for that." Caden's chest tightened. He had known something was off, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. He hadn't wanted to rush her, hadn't wanted to pressure her into something she wasn't ready for. But hearing her admit that she was scared hit him harder than he expected. "I don't want you to feel like I'm pushing you into something," he said, his voice low. "I'm not rushing this. If you need more time, I can give that to you. I don't want you to feel trapped." Lily's eyes softened at his words, and she reached out to take his hand, a small but meaningful gesture. "I know you're not pushing me, Caden. It's just. I've been in relationships before where things felt right in the beginning, but then, they just fell apart. And I'm scared that this is going to be the same. I don't want to get hurt again. Caden squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of empathy for her. He understood her fear, perhaps better than anyone. He had spent his entire life guarding his heart, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of trusting someone completely. But with Lily, it felt different. For the first time, he didn't want to be afraid. He wanted to let her in, to show her the man he was beneath the armor he had built over the years. I'm not asking you to jump in without thinking, he said, his voice steady. But I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm willing to take this as slow as you need. We can figure this out together. Lily smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. She nodded, feeling a weight lift from her chest. Thank you, she whispered. I'm just scared of losing myself in this. I've spent so long building my own life, my career, and I don't want to lose that. But I also don't want to lose what we have. Caden reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You don't have to lose yourself, Lily. I don't want you to change for me. I just want to be someone who adds to your life, not takes from it. The sincerity in his words touched her deeply. She had never felt so understood by anyone before. Caden wasn't asking her to compromise her values, her ambitions, or her career. He was simply offering her the chance to build something real with him, without the pressure of expectation. For the first time in weeks, the fear in Lily's chest started to ease. She leaned forward, her face softening as she looked into Caden's eyes. Maybe I've been too scared, she admitted. I've been so focused on protecting myself that I didn't realize how much I've been shutting myself off from the possibility of something real. With you. Caden smiled, his heart swelling at her words. I'm not going to let you get hurt, Lily. I'm not going to push you into anything you're not ready for. But I do want you to know that I care about you. More than I've let myself admit. Lily's heart fluttered at his confession. She had known, on some level, that she was falling for him, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel more real. She had always been cautious about giving her heart away, but with Caden, there was a part of her that was willing to take the risk. Let's take it one step at a time, she said softly, her voice full of hope. No rushing, no expectations. Just us, seeing where this goes. Caden nodded, his heart finally feeling at ease. One step at a time, he agreed. The rest of the evening passed in a comfortable silence, the tension between them dissipating. They spent the rest of the night talking about their childhoods, their dreams for the future, and the small things that made them happy. They weren't rushing to define anything, but the connection they shared grew stronger with every word, every glance. By the time Lily left that night, the air between them had shifted. It wasn't the same as before. It wasn't just about the attraction or the chemistry. It was about trust, about understanding, about letting go of their fears and allowing themselves to explore what they had together. As she kissed him goodbye, her lips lingering on his for a moment longer than usual, Caden knew that this was only the beginning. It wasn't going to be easy, nothing worth having ever was, but he was ready to take that first step with her. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't alone. He was ready to walk this path, wherever it might lead, with Lily by his side. The days following their heartfelt conversation were a mixture of growth and apprehension for both Caden and Lily. They had opened up to each other in a way that neither had expected, and the bond between them had deepened. But the weight of their feelings lingered in the air, not a pressure but an undeniable presence that both of them felt. The fear of vulnerability still hovered at the edges of their relationship, even as they worked to trust each other more. Caden spent his days thinking about Lily, about the way she smiled when she talked about her work, the spark in her eyes when she shared her passions, and the soft laugh that had become so familiar to him. He was used to control, to carefully orchestrated plans and calculated decisions, but with Lily, he felt like he was letting go. He wasn't in control, and that realization both terrified and thrilled him. For once, he wasn't hiding behind the wall he had built around himself. With her, he was letting his guard down, step by careful step. Lily, too, found herself constantly thinking about Caden. She had always been independent, focused on her career, determined not to let anyone into the carefully constructed world she had built. But with him, everything felt different. Caden's honesty had broken through the walls she had put up, and the connection they shared wasn't something she could ignore. She wasn't used to feeling so exposed, so vulnerable, but with Caden, it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like an invitation to build something real, something that wasn't based on superficiality or pretense. Their dates continued, simple and unassuming. A walk through the park, a quiet dinner at a local cafe, a visit to a museum they had both wanted to see. There was no rush, no need to define things immediately, and that was part of what made it so easy. They were discovering each other in a way that felt natural, like two people who had been waiting for the right time to meet, even though neither of them had known it. One rainy evening, after a long day for both of them, Caden invited Lily to his penthouse for dinner. It wasn't a special occasion, just another night for them to spend together, but the thought of having her over felt different this time. It felt important. There was a certain weight to it, as if they were crossing another threshold in their relationship, something unspoken but deeply felt. When Lily arrived, Caden greeted her at the door with a soft smile, his eyes warm. She had been in the hospital all day, working a long shift, and her exhaustion was visible, though she still managed to smile back at him. She looked tired but beautiful, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, the casualness of it making Caden's heart skip a beat. She didn't need to try. She just was, and that was what made her so special. "Hey," Caden said, stepping aside to let her in. "I know it's been a long day, but I thought we could keep it low-key. I've got some food ready, and I thought maybe we could just relax." Lily smiled, appreciating the gesture. "That sounds perfect, honestly. I'm so tired, I can barely keep my eyes open. A quiet night in sounds exactly what I need." They sat down at the small dining table in Caden's kitchen, the soft glow of candles flickering between them. Caden had prepared a simple meal, pasta with a homemade sauce and a fresh salad on the side. It wasn't extravagant, but it was the thought that counted. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that wasn't awkward but easy, as if they had known each other for much longer than they had. As the meal came to a close, Caden leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Lily. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he admitted, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. "I know we haven't been seeing each other for that long, but I feel like something between us is growing, and I want to know what you think. Where do you see this going?" Lily's breath caught in her throat, and she set down her fork, meeting his gaze. It wasn't a question she had expected. It wasn't that she didn't want to think about the future, but she hadn't allowed herself to imagine it yet. It was too soon. She hadn't even considered what a future with him might look like. She had been focused on the present, the easy flow of their time together, the laughter, the quiet moments that made her feel seen. But now, as Caden's question hung in the air, she realized that she had to confront the possibility that this wasn't just a passing moment. It was something real. I don't know, Caden," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I think I've been holding back because I'm scared. Scared of getting hurt, scared of getting too close to someone who might not be ready for something serious. But I also know that every time I'm with you, I feel like I can be myself. Like there's no pressure, no expectations, and that's something I haven't felt in a long time." Caden leaned forward, his eyes full of understanding. "I'm not going anywhere, Lily. I know I've been distant at times, and maybe that's because I'm scared, too. Scared of letting someone in, of letting them see the parts of me that I've kept hidden. But with you, it's different. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Lily felt her heart flutter at his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly believe it. The doubt, the fear that had been gnawing at her heart slowly began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. She didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, she knew that she wanted to explore this connection they had. Whatever it turned out to be, she was willing to take that next step. "I want that, too," she said softly. "I want to see where this goes, Caden. I want to stop being afraid of what might happen and just live in the moment with you." Caden smiled, a real, genuine smile that made his eyes light up in a way she hadn't seen before. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his thumb brushing gently against her skin. "Then let's do it together. No pressure, no rush. Just us, seeing where this takes us." They sat there for a long time, their hands intertwined, the world outside fading into the background. There was no need for grand declarations or promises of forever. They didn't need to define what this was, because the connection between them was enough. For the first time, they both felt like they were on the same page, both willing to take the next step forward without fear of what the future might hold. Later, as the evening grew late, they moved to the living room, curling up together on the couch. The soft light from the fireplace flickered across their faces, and for the first time, the weight of the past seemed to lift from both of them. Caden leaned his head back, closing his eyes for a moment, while Lily rested her head on his shoulder, both of them comfortable in the quiet of the night. It wasn't perfect. There were still uncertainties, still fears that lingered in the corners of their hearts. But in that moment, they didn't need to know everything. They didn't need to have a roadmap for the future. All they needed was each other, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The days following their conversation in the living room felt like a quiet turning point in Caden and Lily's relationship. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic change, but there was a sense of calm that settled over them both. They had talked about their fears, their hopes, and what they wanted moving forward, and it seemed like an invisible weight had been lifted. They didn't need to have all the answers or know exactly what the future held. For the first time in a long while, they were both willing to just be, to let their connection grow naturally without the pressure of trying to define it. Caden continued to be drawn to Lily in ways he couldn't fully explain. The more he spent time with her, the more he realized how different she was from anyone he had ever known. She didn't care about his wealth or his status. She didn't expect anything from him except his time, his attention, and his honesty. It was a stark contrast to the world he had grown up in, a world where people only seemed to care about what they could gain from him. With Lily, there was no agenda, no ulterior motive. She was simply herself, and that was more than enough for him. Lily, too, felt the shift. She had been cautious in the beginning, hesitant to let anyone too close after years of focusing solely on her career. She had built walls around herself, and while she had never regretted it, meeting Caden had made her question whether she had been shutting herself off from the very things that could make her truly happy. With him, there was no pressure, no need to be anyone other than who she was. He didn't try to fix her or change her, and in return, she didn't feel the need to prove anything to him. They were simply two people, figuring it out together. One evening, Caden invited Lily to a small gathering at his penthouse. It was the first time he had extended the invitation, and while it wasn't a huge party, the idea of bringing Lily into his world felt like a big step. He didn't want to keep her separated from parts of his life, and yet, the thought of her meeting his friends, seeing his world, made him nervous. It was one thing to spend time alone together, but it was another thing entirely to expose her to the more public side of who he was. Lily, for her part, had been nervous, too. She had never been the type to feel completely at ease in social settings, especially when it came to meeting people who lived in a world so different from her own. But she was determined to make it work. She had been with Caden long enough to know that his world didn't define him. It was just a part of him, but it didn't change the person he was. When they arrived, Caden introduced Lily to a few of his closest friends. The gathering was small, just a few people, but it was enough to make Lily feel out of her element. She stood by Caden's side, watching as he chatted with others, noticing how effortlessly he moved through the crowd. There was a kind of magnetism about him, a quiet confidence that made people gravitate toward him. Yet, he never seemed to care about the attention. He was always in control of the situation, his presence commanding, but not in a way that made anyone uncomfortable. Lily, on the other hand, was more reserved. She smiled and made polite conversation, but she could feel the walls of discomfort creeping up around her. She wasn't used to being around people like this, people who didn't share her same values or experiences. She felt out of place, as though she didn't quite belong in the same room as them. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered in the back of her mind. As the evening went on, Caden noticed her discomfort. He had always been attuned to the subtle shifts in people's emotions, and he could see that Lily was trying to keep up, but wasn't entirely comfortable in the environment. He excused himself from the conversation he was having and walked over to where she stood near the window, looking out at the city. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Lily smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just getting used to this. It's not exactly my scene." Caden's brow furrowed slightly. He had known this wouldn't be easy for her. The world he moved in was one she didn't necessarily fit into, and he wasn't sure how to make her feel at ease in it. But he didn't want her to feel alienated. He wanted her to feel like she could be herself, even in his world. "You don't have to be here if you don't want to be," Caden said, his voice sincere. "I can introduce you to whoever you want, but if you'd rather leave, I won't be upset. I just want you to feel comfortable." Lily looked up at him, her gaze softening. "It's not that," she said, shaking her head. "I just feel different here. I don't know how to explain it." "I get it," Caden said, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "But you don't need to impress anyone here. These people, they're not who you have to impress. It's just me. You've already impressed me by being yourself. That's all that matters." Lily met his gaze, and for the first time that evening, she felt the tension in her chest begin to loosen. Caden wasn't asking her to be anything other than what she was. He wasn't judging her for not fitting into his world, instead, he was giving her the space to be herself. That realization was like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. She smiled at him, the uncertainty in her eyes slowly fading. "You're right," she said, her voice more confident now. "I've been so focused on what I don't belong to that I forgot to appreciate what I do have. What we have." Caden smiled, his thumb brushing her arm gently. "Exactly. You don't have to be anyone other than yourself. That's who I want." As the evening continued, Lily found herself more at ease. She still didn't entirely feel like she belonged in the circle of people around her, but she realized that it didn't matter. The only person whose opinion mattered was Caden's, and he had already made it clear that he valued her for who she was. She didn't need to be anything else for him. The night ended with Caden walking Lily to her car, the city streets quiet beneath the night sky. As they stood there, Caden turned to her, his eyes serious but soft. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, his voice low. "I know it wasn't easy." Lily smiled, her heart fluttering at the sincerity in his words. "I'm glad I did. I'm glad we did this. It's just, sometimes it's hard to get out of my own head. But being with you, Caden, it feels like I can just breathe." Caden leaned in, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "We'll take things at your pace. No rush." For the first time in a long time, Lily felt the peace she had been craving. There were still uncertainties about the future, still fears that lingered, but with Caden by her side, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had once felt. She didn't need to have everything figured out. All she needed was to trust in the connection they were building, step by step. And with that thought, she finally felt like she was ready to see where this path would take them. Together, the following weeks were filled with a quiet kind of excitement that neither Caden nor Lily had expected. The steady rhythm of their relationship had become something neither of them had anticipated when they first met. It had been an unusual beginning, neither of them looking for anything more than the casual conversation and fleeting moments that came with a simple dinner or a walk through the park. But now, as they continued to see each other, the connection between them had grown deeper, effortlessly, but profoundly. Caden had never been one for grand gestures. In fact, his world had always been one of calculated moves and carefully timed decisions. His life had been built on structure, on the knowledge that if he followed the right steps, he would achieve success. But when it came to Lily, none of that mattered. She had slowly unraveled him, piece by piece, in a way that made him realize he didn't want control anymore. He wanted to let go. To feel. To trust. For the first time in his life, he was willing to let someone else in. And that scared him. Lily, too, was learning to let go. She had been focused on her career for so long that she hadn't realized how much she had been shutting herself off from everything else. But with Caden, everything was different. There was a simplicity to him, a kind of peace that radiated from his quiet strength. She had always thought that love and relationships were supposed to be complicated, but with him, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. And though she had been hesitant at first, unsure of how deeply she should let herself fall, she was beginning to realize that she didn't want to fight it anymore. One evening, as the weather turned warmer and the city buzzed with energy, Caden invited Lily to an art gallery opening. It wasn't the kind of event Caden usually attended. He wasn't a fan of the social expectations that came with such gatherings, but it was something Lily had mentioned wanting to do. She had always had a love for art, something she had inherited from her mother, and when she'd casually mentioned it, Caden had taken note. He wanted to do something special for her, something that wasn't about his world but about something that mattered to her. The gallery was intimate, with soft lighting and quiet music playing in the background. People milled about, admiring the paintings and sculptures, discussing the artist's techniques and themes. Caden had expected the event to be filled with artists and critics, people who could talk circles around him about the meanings behind each piece. But what surprised him most was how comfortable he felt standing beside Lily, sharing in her appreciation for the art, not having to pretend to know more than he did. As they moved through the gallery, Lily's eyes lit up as she stood in front of a large canvas, her fingers tracing the outline of the colors that seemed to swirl together in a chaotic yet beautiful dance. "This one," she said softly, her voice almost reverent. "It's incredible. The way the colors blend, the movement, it feels like the artist was trying to capture something about the world that's always in motion, something that can never quite be caught." Caden watched her as she spoke, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. There was a passion in her words, a conviction in the way she saw the world that he found captivating. He was used to people trying to impress him, trying to prove something, but Lily was different. She didn't need to prove anything. She simply was, and that was more than enough. "Do you always see the world like this?" he asked, his voice low. Lily turned to him, her gaze thoughtful for a moment. "I guess I've always tried to understand it. There's so much beauty in the world, Caden, but sometimes it's hard to see it. We get caught up in everything else, our jobs, our routines, our own expectations, and forget to stop and appreciate the things that really matter. Like art. Or people. Or the way the world feels when you're present in it." Her words struck him deeply, more than he had expected. He had spent so much of his life looking forward, working hard to build his future, that he had forgotten how to appreciate the present. He had been so focused on achieving the next goal, on ticking off the boxes, that he had missed the moments in between. But with Lily, those moments suddenly felt important. He realized that he didn't need to rush through life to get to the next milestone. He could enjoy the journey, savor the small moments, and let the world unfold as it was meant to. "I wish I could see the world like you do," Caden said quietly, his voice filled with a sincerity he hadn't expected. Lily smiled softly, her eyes meeting his with an understanding that made his heart flutter. "You can, Caden. You just have to allow yourself to. Life isn't all about what comes next. Sometimes, it's about what's happening right now." They stood in front of the painting for several minutes, both lost in the beauty of it, in the quiet of the space around them. It was a moment of connection, not just with the art, but with each other. Caden had never been the type to believe in fate or destiny, but standing there with Lily, he couldn't shake the feeling that this connection they shared, was exactly where he was meant to be. As they left the gallery, the night air was crisp, the streets of the city bustling with life. Caden offered her his arm, and she took it without hesitation. They walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps in sync, as if they had been walking together for much longer than they actually had. "You know," Caden said after a while, breaking the quiet, "I've never really thought much about art before tonight. But I think I'm starting to understand it a little better." Lily looked up at him with a small laugh. "I'm glad to hear that. But honestly, I think you get it more than you know. Art isn't just about the colors or the brushstrokes. It's about feeling something, about seeing the world in a new way. And you've been doing that since we met. You've been letting go, letting yourself be vulnerable, seeing the world through a different lens. That's what art is, Caden. It's about perspective." Her words resonated deeply with him. He had been trying to control everything for so long, trying to make sure that nothing ever caught him off guard. But with Lily, he had started to let go, to let himself be present in a way that felt unfamiliar but also freeing. As they reached the car, Caden turned to face her, his expression serious. "Lily, I need you to know something. I don't want to rush this. I know I've been guarded, but I want you to know that I care about you. More than I've let on." Lily's gaze softened, her hand gently resting on his. "I care about you too, Caden. And I don't need any grand declarations from you. I just need to know that you're here, with me, right now." He nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." As they drove through the city, the lights reflecting in the rearview mirror, Caden realized that, for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what the future held. He didn't need to have it all figured out. All he needed was to take it one step at a time, with Lily by his side. And that was enough. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with Lily, he was beginning to believe that it would be one worth taking. Together, the days following their evening at the gallery had passed in a comfortable haze for both Caden and Lily. They had found a rhythm in their relationship, one that was built on trust, understanding, and, most importantly, the quiet acceptance of who they were. Caden felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for years. His life, once dominated by business meetings, deadlines, and the cold distance of high society, now had a new vibrancy, thanks to Lily. And though he still couldn't shake the echoes of his past, the weight of his isolation seemed to lighten with each day they spent together. It was as if she had unlocked a door inside him, and through it, he could see a world he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. Lily, too, was beginning to feel the shift. She had always been cautious about letting someone into her life, her work had always been her priority, and she had convinced herself that love wasn't something she needed. But with Caden, everything was different. She had never met someone who so effortlessly understood her, someone who didn't expect her to be anything other than herself. As much as she had tried to keep her guard up, it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the feelings that had been growing between them. The walls she had so carefully built around her heart were beginning to crumble, and though the vulnerability was frightening, it was also liberating. But as much as they had grown closer, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that neither of them could fully ignore. The fear of the unknown lingered in the background of their relationship. Caden had been burned in the past, by people who only wanted something from him, by relationships that had felt like a game to others. He had always kept his emotions in check, always maintained a distance so no one could truly hurt him. But with Lily, that control was slipping. And though he wanted to let himself feel, there was still a part of him that was afraid of what it might mean if he allowed himself to open up completely. Lily, too, had her doubts. She had spent so much time building her career, focusing on her own goals, that she had never allowed herself to consider what it would mean to build a life with someone else. She had learned to rely on herself, to be independent, and now, with Caden, she was beginning to question everything she had once thought she needed. Could she truly let someone into her life without losing the sense of self she had worked so hard to build? Was she ready to take the leap and trust him with her heart? It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as they sat together in the park, that the conversation that had been lingering between them finally came to a head. They were sitting on a bench under a large oak tree, the sun filtering through the leaves and casting dappled shadows on the ground. Caden had his arm around Lily's shoulders, and she rested her head against him, the peacefulness of the moment wrapping around them like a blanket. "Do you ever wonder if we're moving too fast?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid the question would somehow break the calm they had found together. Caden looked down at her, his hand gently stroking her arm. He had felt this question coming for a while, and though he had expected it, the words still felt like a heavy weight in his chest. "I've been wondering the same thing," he admitted, his voice low, thoughtful. "I've never been good at taking things slowly. But with you, it feels right. It doesn't feel like I'm rushing into something, Lily. It feels like we're just living in the moment. But I understand if you feel like it's too fast. I don't want to make you uncomfortable." Lily lifted her head, meeting his gaze with a softness in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. "It's not that I'm uncomfortable," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with a hint of vulnerability. "I think I'm just scared. Scared of what comes next, scared of letting myself fall too hard. I've been so focused on my career, on building something for myself, that I've never really thought about what it would mean to share that with someone. To open up like this." Caden's chest tightened at her words. He understood her fear more than she probably realized. He had spent most of his life building walls to protect himself, afraid of being hurt, afraid of letting anyone close. But with Lily, those walls seemed to crumble, piece by piece. He wasn't sure if he was ready to let her see every part of him, but he also knew that he didn't want to lose her. "I get it," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I've been scared, too. But I don't want to let fear control this. I don't want to let fear keep us from exploring something that feels real. We're both taking a risk, Lily. But isn't that what makes it worth it? If we don't take the leap, we'll never know." Lily looked at him for a long moment, her heart racing. She had always been the one to play it safe, to keep her emotions in check, to protect herself from the possibility of heartbreak. But with Caden, something was different. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that she didn't want to let fear stand in the way of something that felt so genuine, so right. "Maybe it's worth the risk," she said softly, her voice full of conviction she hadn't expected. "Maybe we just need to stop overthinking it and see where this takes us." Caden smiled, the weight in his chest lifting as he pulled her closer. He kissed the top of her head, his heart full of gratitude. "I'm glad you feel that way. I don't want to rush things either, but I don't want to run from it, either. Let's just take it one day at a time. Together." For the first time, the uncertainty that had lingered between them seemed to dissipate. They didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to figure it out together, at their own pace. There was no need for grand promises, no need for declarations of forever. They were simply two people, learning to trust each other, to love each other, in the way that felt natural to them. As the afternoon turned into evening, they walked hand in hand through the park, the sun setting behind them, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The world around them seemed to slow down, as if giving them the space to enjoy the quiet beauty of the moment. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, they were both willing to embrace the unknown. Together. The weeks that followed were a testament to the strength of their connection. They continued to explore their relationship, each day revealing new layers of trust, affection, and understanding. They had learned to communicate openly, to face their fears head-on, and to let go of the past that had shaped them. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when they questioned whether they were truly ready for what they were building together. But in those moments, they held on to each other, knowing that they didn't have to have it all figured out. All they needed was each other. And as time passed, Caden realized that for the first time, he wasn't afraid of love. With Lily, he had discovered something he had never thought possible, the freedom to be himself, completely and utterly. He had spent his life building walls, hiding behind success and control, but with her, he felt safe enough to let them come down. And in doing so, he had found a love that was more real, more fulfilling, than he ever could have imagined. Lily, too, had found something she had never expected. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to stand on her own 2 feet. But with Caden, she had discovered that she didn't have to choose between love and independence. She could have both. She could have a future with someone who respected her, who saw her for who she truly was, and who was willing to walk beside her, step by step, through whatever came next. And as they stood together, looking out over the city, neither of them knew what the future would bring. But for the first time in their lives, they were ready to face it together, hand in hand, hearts open, and no longer afraid of the risk.